Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin Daf Pei. Today's stuff is sponsored by Judy Schwartz in loving memory of her father, Chaskel Taidor, Rabbi Yechezkel Shraga ben Rabbi Yehuda Leib Halevi, and Esther on his 32nd yahrzeit. A Torah scholar who survived Auschwitz and Buchenwald, founded kibbutz Buchenwald after the war, and married and living in Eretz Israel. You would have been amazed and happy to know that his youngest daughter and two granddaughters learned Daf Yomi with Hadran. Today's stuff is sponsored by Anna Plunka in loving memory of Moshe ben Amram Moshe Rabbeinu on his yahrzeit. Okay, we're going to get started with a review of yesterday's daf, the end of the daf. We started with a Mishnah that is very unclear what the Mishnah is talking about because we have strange case and the machloket is so complicated to understand that in the end, we're going to suggest a third explanation. It's going to basically split between the first opinion, the second opinion, and actually say that they're talking about different cases entirely. So let's go back to the case in the Mishnah. Rotzeach shenitarev ba'achirim kulam pturim. According to Tanakama, we have a murderer who gets mixed up with a bunch of people and we can no longer identify who the murderer is. They all are exempt because you can't kill based on case of doubt. That sounds reasonable. The problem is that Rabbi Yehuda says, Konsimotam kipa. Rabbi Yehuda says we put them all in a kipa, which generally is meant to be understood as, we're going to see the whole kipa on the next daf, of putting them in a cell basically until they die. Just a little bit weird. How could we just kill all these innocent people just because there was a murderer mixed up among them? So the whole issue of kipa is complicated as it is. The Gefet this week's shiur about the whole issue of kipa, which is a fascinating topic and kind of quite a complicated topic to deal with, particularly in the middle of a war that we're going through with people living in tunnels and small spaces. Rabbanit Dreyfus gave a shiur on it this week on Gefet. It's up in Hebrew. It's not yet up in English. Hopefully the beginning of next week it will be. But if anyone wants to listen already and you want to listen to Hebrew, it's already on the with the Beyond the Daf materials in Hebrew. Now, let's just talk about this idea. So we have a Rotzeach Shentarei B'Achirim Kulam Ptuim. We have Rabbi Yehuda who says Konsimotam L'kipa. Now, the first two explanations either said it must be we're talking about murderers, all of them murderers, otherwise Rabbi Yehuda makes no sense. So the first opinion was to say, Rabbi Abba in the name of Shmuel, that we're talking about a Rotzeach who there was no verdict issued yet, a murderer who gets mixed up with murderers who are already convicted. And basically we're going to say, right, Tanakama says, well, you can't issue a verdict without the person being there. And since you don't anymore know which person it is, right, you could stick them all in the court, but not being there means you have to really say, you're the one. And we can't do that anymore because we're confused. And therefore, they're all exempt. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you can. Okay, it's not a big deal. And since anyway, they're all murderers, we can just, it's true we can't convict the murderer without being there. But there was already enough evidence, and now they're mixed up with other murderers. And think about all the dangers to society this will cause having all these murderers on the loose. So we allow, we do it indirectly. Rish Lakish had a totally different interpretation. It said, oh, we're not even talking about people here. We're talking about animals. We're talking about oxen who gored. And basically the machloket is, right, everyone agrees that with a person, the person has to be there. The question is just, in this case, are we going to just forego that and just say we can kill without the verdict? But with oxen, the question is, maybe with oxen you can do the verdict without. And that's Rabbi Yehuda who basically is going to allow it. Or do we view the oxen like humans? Because remember, the shore and the ox and the owner get compared in the pasuk. And since you can't judge a person without, you can't judge the shore without being there, and therefore they're all exempt, all the oxen. Okay, once we move it into oxen, even though we believe in animal rights, right, it's just a lot easier to say, well, since these oxen anyway all kill people, they're a hazard to society, and putting them in a kippah is already a little less severe than the humans. However, comes Rava, the last two words in Ayin Tedem Abed. I'm a Rava. And Rava says the following. Now, this is a tactic used often, which is not only were there braitot out there, okay, that were, people were reciting, but there were braitot that were specifically designated to Mishnah, to explain a Mishnah. So there was a braita on this Mishnah, which you're going to clearly see does not fit with either of the two opinions. Ihachi, hainu dekatane ala. Well, there's a braita on this Mishnah, and this braita is going to make it clear that neither option one nor option two is correct. I'm a Rabbi Yossi. Here's the braita. Rabbi Yossi says, now Rabbi Yossi was the son of Chalafta, Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta. So Rabbi Yossi talks about his father, and he says, Afilu Abba Chalafta Beinehen. It says this would be the halacha, even if my father halafta was among them. Okay, now first of all, his father wasn't an ox. So it definitely can't be the Mishnah was talking about oxen if he was saying, even if my father was among them. So that rejects Rish Lakish off the bat. The second problem is that his father wasn't a murderer. So if the whole first explanation of Shmuel was that they were all murderers, well, his father definitely wasn't a murderer. And his point of saying, even if my father was there, was saying, even if a tzaddik was there, a very righteous person, then it would still be the case. Okay? Now, so let's understand what Rav is going to say then. Rav is going to have some explanation that fits in with this Abba Chalafta. On the other hand, then he's going to end up with putting his father Abba Chalafta in a kipa, right, in a prison cell, which would be weird. So what we're going to do is like this. Ella Amar Rava. Rav is going to split between case one and case two. And basically, he's going to do a merging of Shmuel and Rish Lakish. And he's going to say the first line, Tanakama, is talking about humans. And the second line is talking about oxen. Okay? So now, and also what doesn't make sense is if we say like the rabbi's exempt, even if Abba Chalafta was there, it also doesn't really make much sense. So we have to understand this whole thing. So Rava is going to completely change what the Mishnah means. Ela Amar Rava Hachi Kamar. So Rava says, because Rava raised the problem, Rava now addresses it and says, this is how to read the Mishnah. Shnayim shahayu omdim, v'chetz yatsa mibenehem v'harak. Okay, the simple reading, we're not going to go with the Rambam, was a bit of a different reading, but the simple reading of this is, two people were standing. Okay, we have two witnesses watching, and they see an arrow come out from one of the two people, but they can't tell which one shot the arrow and killed the person. So now, shnehem ptulim. They're both exempt because we can't convict anyone because we don't have clear evidence which was the one that did it. But Amar Rabbi Yossi, afilu Abba Chalafta benehem. Now we understand the Abba Chalafta. If you have Abba Chalafta and you have a pretty, a criminal type guy or something like that, and you see that an arrow came out from between the two, and you know that Abba Chalafta is, his father Chalafta is not the murderer, you still can't convict the other person, okay, whether they were a criminal or whether they weren't a criminal. But the point is, even if it's clear to you that it wasn't one of them, because they're such a righteous person, there's no way they shot this arrow to kill someone, you still can't convict the other one. Okay, now this makes perfect sense. That's the rabbis, kulam ptulim. Now this makes perfect sense. It just doesn't really fit with the words in the Mishnah exactly. Okay, but again, let's read it again. Rotzeach shenitarev ba'achirim kulam ptulim. So nitarev here doesn't mean what we thought. We had someone who was a murderer, and we had people who, let's say, weren't or were, or we don't know what, and they all got mixed up and confused. But it's that we're confused who the murderer is because the murder happened in a way that they were in a group, and we couldn't identify which one was the murderer. Okay, so it's not so far different. But now it's going to get really different because, as I said, the second line, Rabbi Yehuda says we put them in a kipa, makes no sense according to that, right? We have two people, one is a murderer, one isn't. We're not going to put them both in a kipa, especially if kipa means that they're going to be killed. Okay, if I understood correctly, listening to Rabbanit Shiur, I think she was suggesting, and I didn't have a chance to really look it up. It definitely would pay to look up in maybe in Safrai's book, in Mishna Eretz Yisrael, but that maybe kipa means different things in different situations. And it doesn't always mean, like, it could just mean putting them in prison and not necessarily, right? But still, putting someone in prison who's totally innocent would be unfair. So now we're going to go to the next section. And the next section of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says we put them in a kipa, is talking about oxen and not people. B'shor shenigmar dino shenitarei b'shvarim acharim ma'alye. Okay, ma'alye means good shvarim. Okay, now we're going to say, like Rish Lakish, but not exactly like Rish Lakish. We have a shore that killed, and we even convicted the shore. But now that shore, ran away, I don't know, and now we can't identify that ox compared to all these other oxen that's mixed up with. The other oxen hadn't killed anybody. Well, so klimotam. Okay, now here, this is a different opinion. Okay, this is, someone else says this, that we actually stone them. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, konsim otam lekipa. And Rabbi Yehuda says, we put them in a kipa. Okay, we have this machlokes. Can we directly kill them all, or can we only indirectly kill them all? Now, everybody agrees that you can kill them. Now, why is that? You're now taking, let's say, my oxen. My ox did nothing wrong, but because it got mixed up with another ox, you're going to kill my ox? Well, let's think about it this way. And then the machloket is just, do we kill directly or only indirectly? So the issue is that once you remember laws of ta'arovet, things get mixed up with other things and they're batel, right? Sometimes you could have one nullified into a mixture of something else, like with kashrus, right? Your drop of milk falls into your cholent and the milk gets canceled in the cholent. Well, if you have, okay, first of all, there's laws of rove, majority, there's shishim, there's all different things that either can get nullified, can't get nullified. And whether they're the same type, often the same type actually can't get nullified, like milk and cholent is different, so one kind of absorbs the other. Well, here we have a few issues. Number one, it's an ox mixed up with another ox. So that's already min b'mino, we call it. It's the same type. The other thing is, okay, one example, like the reason why people are crazy about cleaning broccoli and cauliflower and things like that is because even though a teeny little bug would be nullified in the big mixture, it's not, because it's called a bria. It's a whole thing. So a shiur is an entire, you can't just cancel out a shiur and say it's as if it doesn't exist. So there's no laws of bitul here, which means what? A shiur is supposed to get stoned if it's convicted shiur, then that it killed someone. It's forbidden to benefit from. Now, if that ox who's forbidden to benefit from gets mixed up with other oxen who are fine, all the oxen are now forbidden to benefit from. So if you take my ox now, that was mine, who got mixed up with this other bad ox, and you're going to kill my ox or put in a kipa, doesn't really matter to me because I can't use my ox anyway, because the fact that this ox got mixed up with mine now means that mine is now forbidden. All of them are forbidden because we don't know who's who. So it's not the biggest deal now. Again, forget about animal rights aside, but remember, we're worried about an ox on the loose that could kill someone. So even though there's animal rights, right, we have to protect the people more than the animals. And therefore, all of these oxen, since we're not sure who, according to this opinion, would be put in a kipa. Okay, and the machloket there isn't what we said in the Mishna of patur or put in a kipa. It's actually put in a kipa, or can you actually stone them? Okay, and that's the way Rava reads our Mishnah. Clearly not the simple reading of the Mishnah, because the simple reading of the Mishnah is this one case and there's a machloket about it. But as we saw, it was very hard to understand what the Mishnah was in the first place. So sometimes in the transmission of these Mishnayot, things got, transmitted a little bit in a complicated way, or, looking simple when it really wasn't, and could be it was just a problem in the transmission of the Mishnah. Now we're going to get off on a total tangent, because what the Gemara is going to do is it's going to bring a braita to support this reading of Rava, which, right, already Rava's reading is a little out there, but if we have a braita that supports it, even better. But the braita is going to start with a different case, and as soon as we finish quoting the braita to support Rava's reading of the Mishnah, we're then going to go off and try to understand the first part of the Mishnah, which was a different case entirely. The ha-tanya. Now, ha-tanya most often in the Gemara is used as ha means hare, behold, and behold, a braita says, which is usually a question. But sometimes it's a support, okay? And behold, it says as a positive thing. So that's our use of it here. It's supporting. Para shehimita, as I said, this first case isn't connected. A cow that kills, and a pregnant cow we're going to see. V'achar kach yalda. So the cow killed and then gave birth. Okay, we don't know when the cow got pregnant. That's going to be a whole big topic. But right now we're going to say the cow killed and then gave birth. So the cow, okay, so now we're going to say, what do we do with the offspring? Is the offspring connected to the cow in the sense that if the cow was convicted, then the offspring is also convicted and basically is forbidden to benefit from and has to be killed? Or is the offspring considered separate or not? So it's all going to depend on when the baby was born, when the calf was born. Im ad shelo nigmar dina yalda, if the birth was before the verdict, then when the verdict was issued, the calf was no longer there, right? So then vlada mutar. So then the offspring is totally fine. Im shenigmar dina yalda, but if the cow gave birth after it was already a convicted cow, well, then whatever comes out of the cow that was convicted, right? The cow itself is forbidden to benefit, so whatever comes out of it is forbidden to benefit, and therefore vlada asur. Okay, so that sounds pretty simple, but we're going to get a little complicated with it later because there's some details missing, like when did the cow get pregnant, and what happened? What was the status at the time of the goring, of the killing? Okay, so we're going to have to see. We're going to get back to that. But now we're in the part of the braita that it was relevant to our purposes, which is nit arev ba'acherim, 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 back to the cow. Now we don't care about the pregnancy or not, but if that cow got mixed with others and others with others, meaning even if it was a double, one cow came from here and the cow that killed got mixed up with a group, and then one from that group got mixed up with another group. Okay, there's no beetle here; it's not canceled out. Consino tam the kipa, and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Omer meviyin otam lebeitin v'soklim otam. Here's the exact debate that we just claimed was right. One of the opinions of that debate appears in our Mishna, Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, versus Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, who's not mentioned, who said actually you stone all of them directly. Okay, now we're going to go back to that case. Amar Mar. Mar means we're quoting something we said before. So now they're going to say, okay, we didn't mention, like I said, when the cow got pregnant, which makes it sound like the vlad is going to be mutar as long as the vlad was born, the offspring, the calf was born before the verdict, right? Once the verdict is issued, if the cow is still pregnant, right, or the cow gets pregnant after and the cow gives birth after, so anything that comes from that cow is asur b'hana'ah, is forbidden to benefit. Anything that comes from it is forbidden to benefit. Anything that comes from it basically has to get killed because it's just part of the cow. But if the verdict happened before, then no. I'm sorry, if the birth happened before the verdict, then that's not true. And that sounds like, we're going to read the words inside now, afagav dechinag chahavim mi'abra. Even if it was pregnant before the goring. In other words, it sounds like the only thing that matters is the moment of the verdict, not the moment of the goring. Now, what if the cow is pregnant during the goring? So now they're going to say, it sounds like this braita is saying that's an irrelevant factor. Okay, we can still let the calf off the hook as long as the calf was born before the verdict. But that disagrees with something Rava says. And the problem with it disagreeing with Rava is we're not raising a problem with the braita because of Rava. Rava came later. But the point is Rava must know that braita. And if Rava said this, then that can't be what the braita is saying. So let's look. V'hama Rava, did Rava say, Vlad hanogachat asul, hi uvlada nagchu. The vlad of a cow who gores, if the vlad is there, meaning the fetus is already there, meaning she already got pregnant before the goring, then there's a concept called ubar yerech imo, that the ubar is considered a part of the mother's body, okay, both with humans and with animals, which means that if a cow gored and the cow is pregnant, then the cow and the fetus basically are considered nagchanim, okay, even though we don't blame the fetus, but the fetus is just a part of the mother. So if the fetus was there already, the pregnancy happened before the goring, then that would also make the cow, the calf liable. And if when the calf is born, we're basically going to have to kill the calf as well. Okay, that's what Rava said. And Vlada nirbat asur. Oh, by the way, I didn't say this. The context of Rava is not about getting killed. The context here is a different context entirely. It's can you use it for a sacrifice? Okay, you can't bring an animal as a sacrifice if the animal gored. Okay, so now they're saying not only can you not bring the animal as a sacrifice, but if the fetus was already in existence at the time of the goring, you can't bring the fetus as a sacrifice either. In other words, once it's born. Okay, assuming they didn't kill the animal and the calf was born, you cannot use it as a sacrifice. And the same thing with Vlad and Nirbat Asur. Also, if the animal engaged in bestiality, okay, whether this is even someone else engaged in bestiality with the animal, again, you can't bring that animal, even the fetus, as a sacrifice. The calf, once it's born, because it's as if that animal itself, right, the fetus itself had engaged in bestiality. So now we have a problem because the braita didn't seem to say that the pregnancy was relevant, okay? But Rava seems to say the pregnancy is very relevant. It said the only issue was the verdict. Is the baby part of the mother at the time of the verdict? Then the baby will get killed. If it's not, it won't. But what about the pregnancy? If the fetus was there at the time of the pregnancy, it should be relevant as well. And that's not what it says here. So Ema. So they say, fine. So we're going to have to read it like this, okay? Even though it didn't say so, we're going to have to assume that's part of it. Otherwise, how could Rava say that against the braita? So read it like this. Iman shaloni gmar dina ibra v'yalda v'lada mutar. When is it going to, now, if we already said it can't be pregnant at the time of the goring, and it can't be pregnant at the time of the verdict, because either one of those would make the Vlad, the calf, problematic. So it must be that everything happened in between those two things. So first the goring, then the animal got pregnant, then the animal gave birth, and then there was a verdict issued. That would be the only case, or that would be the case where it's permitted. However, the other case would be dina ibra but if the whole thing happened after the verdict, vlada asur. Okay, so we're going to have two possibilities, even though there's a third, and we're going to get to that third one. But right now, the two possibilities are either everything happened in between the goring and the gemardin and the verdict, and that would basically mean since, right, because remember, those two are the critical moments, right? Each one could obligate the vlad. So it would have to be everything was in between. The second option is everything happened after. So now if everything happens after, the cow who gets pregnant is already forbidden. Now, let's look in Rashi. Rashi says it well. If the pregnancy happened after, then what's the problem? Dinolad min ha'isul. Then for sure the calf is going to be problematic because the calf was born from an animal that was already forbidden, right? Once the verdict is issued, as we have two problems. One is the time of the action. Okay, well, that for sure it didn't happen in the time of the action. The vlad wasn't there yet. And the next thing is the time of the verdict. Now, once the verdict happens, if the pregnancy happens after, then the calf is a creation from a forbidden item. So anything that's created by a forbidden item, right? Then forget Yerach, right? That Ubar is Yerach Imo, the Ubar is part of the mother, which is what we said when the goring happened, that it's just part of it. So of course it's included. But now we're saying the creation of the fetus was from a mother that was forbidden. So of course, right? Of course you're going to say anything created from Isur is going to be Asur, right? You can't, she's forbidden, that the Vlad is forbidden. Now I say of course, because in a minute we're going to say not necessarily. Because we know that a vlad is created from two, not just the cow, but you need also a bull. So there's a big machloket, and this is going to be the problem with this reading of the braita, which is Hani chalaman amar zev golem asul. Now, zev golem means if you have something created from both something forbidden and something permitted, okay, so that's zev golem, which is exactly what we have here. We have a calf that was created by a cow that's forbidden and a bull that's not forbidden. So if you say zev golem asul, as long as there's some part of Isser in the creation here, which is the cow, then it's going to be forbidden. That's fine. And then you can say the case, again, that's forbidden, that we thought was just that the birth was after the Gemardin, is actually the pregnancy and the birth were after Gemardin. And the reason why it's forbidden is because this calf was created by something of Isur, even though only 50% of it was forbidden. But turning now to Amabet, Ela Lamanda Amar Zevizegore Mutal. But some people say no. If there's something created from both something forbidden and something permitted, that item is actually permitted because it has heter in it. It's not completely forbidden. So it's not forbidden at all. Okay, this is a big machloket about how we view something created from Isur and heter. So according to that interpretation, ma'ika lememar, then how can we explain this? Because this calf was, right, if you say that all of it happened after Gemardin, so it's got another half to it. It was created by also a male bull. And therefore, it shouldn't be forbidden at all. So why are we saying it's forbidden? So we have to explain, if you can already figure this out, they neglected a different possibility. What we need to remember is it can't be, right, that the at the time of the goring, it couldn't have been pregnant yet. That was the problem with Rava. The braita says at the time of the Gemardin, in order to be, right, let's say, in order to be permitted, it would have to be born before, but in order to be forbidden, it would have to be born after. But maybe the pregnancy happens in between. Okay, so that's what we're going to suggest now. Ella Amar Ravina, and that's going to be the answer, really. Ema. Okay, again, the first one's the same. Imad Shaloni Gemar Dinai Brabi Aldav Lada Mutar. Right, the case where the Vlad is Mutar is everything happened in the in-between stage. Both the pregnancies, so it wasn't pregnant when it was born. When it gored, and it wasn't born before the Gemar Din. That's the in-between case where it's going to, right, everything happens in between those two times, and it's Mutar. But but if the pregnancy, now we're going to move the pregnancy to before, because the pregnancy after, we'd say zevze gorem, if you say zevze gorem is mutar, this was created from Isser and Heter, and it actually wouldn't be forbidden. So you'd have to say the pregnancy happened before the Gemardim, but after the goring, because if it was before the goring, right, that would be a different issue, right? That wouldn't be the Gemardim, wouldn't be the issue. The issue would be the fact that it gored, it was part of the goring. So, so basically, goring, pregnancy, then Gemardin, because then the verdict happens when the mother's pregnant with the child. Now you with the offspring. Now you understand why, right? So now we'll just read a little more and you'll see it inside. And the birth happened after the Gemardin. Vlada Asur, why? The issue is that when the verdict was issued, the fetus was there. And if the fetus is there, we go by Ubar Yerech Imohu, right? So just like we said before, if the fetus was there during the goring, it was considered part of the mother and responsible. If the fetus is there during the Gemardin, the verdict, then also the fetus is just part of the mother. And there was a Gzar Din on the mother. The mother was declared to have to be dead, and the fetus is in it. So therefore, that would be the issue. Now, of course, if it was pregnant at the time of the goring also, but remember, we're trying to explain the braita that differentiated between specifically the verdict. So it must be, the issue is, the pregnancy happened in the middle, and the difference was the animal already born, though, before the verdict, and then it's not considered part of the mother when the mother has the verdict because the blood is already out, the calf is born. Or is the calf born after, and then since the fetus was still inside at the time of the verdict, the calf would be included, and they would kill the calf as well, even if the calf was born later. Okay? So that's how we finally explain that complicated section. Now, the rest of the daf is very easy. We're going back to the Mishna. So the Mishna, we dealt right now with the first part, which was Rotzech, Shintarei, Bachirim, Kulam, Ptuim. Rabbi Yehuda says, Konsim otam lekipa. Okay, I'll just summarize our daf until this point, and then we'll go on to the end. We won't summarize at the end, so focus on the summary now. We basically, starting from yesterday, we had three interpretations of what the Mishnah is. All people and murderers with murderers, just one who didn't have Gemardin, or all oxen, one, again, all ones who killed people, and just one who had one who didn't have Gemardin, the rest who did, or a split between case one and case two. First one was talking about murderer who we can't identify which one it was, and second was oxen who were mixed up with other oxen, one who killed them, the others who didn't, but since anyway now they're all forbidden to benefit from, we actually put them all in a kipa. Or there's even another opinion which didn't appear in our Mishnah, maybe we can directly kill all the oxen. Then from there we brought a braita to prove that reading, which showed this machloket that we just mentioned. And then from there, they got off on the first part of the braita, which was this whole story about the cow who was pregnant and had an offspring, and what at which point the offspring is born, that is the determining factor. But then we realized that we also have to figure out how the pregnancy comes into play, which wasn't in the braita. Now we're going to move to the second part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah then discusses, first line is, if you have a bunch of people that were mixed up with other people, we always go by the lighter punishment. So if we don't know if they're all people who are supposed to get the death penalty, we're going to give them the lighter punishment because safek nefasho lahakel. When it comes to death, we're going to always go and be more lenient. So we'll give the lighter one. And then the Mishnah got into, if these people mix up with those people, right, what the law is. And we got to the basic machloka between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis, which we see many times, is skila more strict, more severe than streifa, or is streifa more severe than skila? So first we're going to deal with the first part, which is kochai be'mito. Shma mina. Can we infer from here, mutra ledavar chamor have mutra ledavar kal? If you get warned, if you do this, you're going to get stoned. But then turns out we're going to give you streifa, right? We're going to burn you because you got mixed up with a whole bunch of people who get burned, and we don't know which one is which. We're going to give you burning. So, right, we don't know, of course, it's you, but one of them is supposed to get stoned, and now it's going to get burned. But they weren't warned about burning. So it sounds like if you get warned that if you do this, you're going to get stoned, we can also burn you also, because it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be specific. That's what it sounds like from this Mishna. The Gemara is saying, is that really true? To which the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, ha'acha b'mayaskinan kigon shehitru bo stam. You would have to explain our Mishnah that they didn't say, do you know if you do this, you're going to get stoned. They just said, you know, if you do this, you're going to get killed. And in that case, we could give you a different punishment. If they had said, you know, if you get killed, you're going to get stoned, and now we don't know who you are and who anyone else is, we actually can't give you the punishment of burning. But if we gave you a general warning and just said, you know, you're going to get killed, then we could give you a different death penalty. And by the way, Rabbi Yehuda says, and by the way, this only matches Tanakama's opinion, not Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, because we're going to see there's a machloket about whether you can even do this in the first place. When you warn, do you have to warn and say you're going to get stoned, or you're going to get burned, or you're going to get strangulation, or whatever it might be? Or can you just give a general warning? So obviously, if you say that if you gave the general warning, then we could switch, right? Then we can easily switch the punishment. And if you didn't, we can't. Obviously, they must hold that you can do that in the first place. And that's the machloket. Hi, Tanahu, and it matches this Tana. So basically, Rabbi Yirmiyah says the Mishnah must hold that, number one, you can give a general warning. And if you did, that would be a case where you could switch the punishment. Otherwise, you can't. So, hi, Tanahu, and it matches the Tana in this braita. And here we're going to see the machloket. Titania. Okay, this is relating actually to a mesit. Mesit has unique laws. But everything else other than the mesit, remember that's someone who sways other people to worship idols, and it says you should have no pity on them, and right, so we have different laws there. But everything else, you need both the edah, you need 23, you need witnesses, and you need warning. And until you basically include in the warning that you are going to get, notice, a death penalty, not a specific death penalty, a death penalty. And then, according to that opinion, it would be a case where that's all they warn the person, and that's how we could give a different punishment. But Rabbi Yehuda, who our Mishnah would not match at all, Omer, you can only do it if you say specifically, you can only kill a person if you specifically say in the warning, do you know, or you're going to, if you do this, you will get the following death penalty, and you have to be specific. Now, where do they get this from? What's the root of their debate? Tanakama yalef mi mikoshesh. The Tanakama says, well, look, the guy who was chopping wood in the desert, remember what happened? Moshe didn't know what punishment to give him. He knew he was supposed to get killed, but he didn't know what punishment to give him. Okay, well, then it's obvious. If he didn't know what punishment to give him, he obviously didn't warn him, do you know if you do this, you'll get this punishment? Because nobody knew what punishment. So there you have proof that you don't need the exact warning. But Rabbi Yehuda Omer, that was a one-time thing because they hadn't yet gotten the rules about what punishment you get. Once the rules were in existence and everybody knew what you get, then you have to warn specifically. So you can't learn from that. It was a one-time thing. Okay, so that was part one. Now we have part two, and with that, we'll finish for today. Haniskalim b'nisrafim. Now the case in the Mishnah was, and I'll remind you what happens. The Mishnah now says, and now we have to go to the next part of the Mishnah. So they give an example, and they say, if a bunch of people who got skila, let's say 3 people who got skila, were mixed up with nisrafim, were mixed up in a group of, let's say, 15 people who were all supposed to get shreifa, okay, right? You're imagining like jail cells, and there's like this jail cell for the people who get shreifa, and this jail cell, and, somehow we got confused. Rabbi Shimon Omer, now that means, I just want to be clear, I said this yesterday, but it means that there's a few people who are stoned and a much larger group of burned. Because anytime they talk about tarovot, which is one of the favorite topics of the Gemara, they always say a small amount of this got mixed up in a bigger pile of that. So the bigger pile is shreifa. This is going to be very critical. Rabbi Shimon says they get stoned. Why? Because shreifa is more strict. And that was what the Mishna said. You always are going to get the lighter punishment. Okay, and then the rabbi said, right? No. They get shreifa because shreifa is the lighter one, because that's all machloket, Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. But now we're going to focus not on the content of what they're saying, but a different thing, which is what? So Matne la Rabbi Yechezkel Rami Bere. Rabbi Yechezkel was the father of Rami Bar Yechezkel and was also the father of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Yechezkel. Who's Rabbi Yehuda Bar Yechezkel? That is Rabbi Yehuda, who we're always hearing in the Gemara. Okay, one of the most famous Amoraim. He's always bringing us stuff, the teachings of Shmuel and the teachings of Rav. He was the student of Rav, and then when Rav died, he became the student of Shmuel. Shmuel loved him. He calls him Shinina. That's going to be basically the last word in today's daf, but we're really going to learn it with tomorrow's daf, and it's the subject of Shuli Mishkin's flashback for this week. So here goes. Matnela Rabbi Yechezkel Rami Bere. So Rabbi Yechezkel is teaching his son Rami the Mishnah, and he reads it though the opposite of what appears in our text. He says Hanisrafim beniskalim. He says it the opposite. It was a few people who get burned who were mixed up in a huge group of people who get stoned. Which, according to our Mishnah, shouldn't make a difference which way it is, right? It doesn't matter. You're always going to go by the lighter one. It doesn't matter who's the majority, who's not. Now, but on the other hand, we have majority rules. So, Rabbi Shimon Omer Yidonu Biskila, Shasreifa Chamura. Rabbi Shimon says they get stoned because Sreifa is more severe. Now, Amarle Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda hears his father teaching this to Rami, his brother, and he says, Amarle Rabbi Yehuda, Abba, lo titnye hachi. Don't teach the Mishnah that way. You have the wrong version of the Mishnah. My area, because if you go with that, it was nisrafim that get mixed up with niskalim, that it was a few people getting burned that get mixed up in a whole bunch of people who get stoned. Remember, Rabbi Shimon says why they get stoned. Why do they get stoned? Because streifa is more severe. But why don't you just say, right, my area does streifa chamura? Why would Rabbi Shimon then say it's because streifa is more severe? Typically, to ruba niskalim you should just say, right, Rabbi Shimon should say, it's because we go by majority. The majority gets stoned of these people, right? We have 3 people who are burned and a mixture of another 15 people who get stoned. Of course, we're going to go with stoning because stoning is the majority. But that's not what Rabbi Shimon said. Rabbi Shimon said we go with stoning because stoning is less severe. Okay? So it doesn't seem to match the wording. Elahachi, but the case should be the opposite. The chiddush of Rabbi Shimon is even when the people who get burned are much larger than the people who get stoned, we still go with stoning. And therefore, he says, this is how you should read the Mishnah, and that's actually how it appears by us. Haniskalim v'nisrafim. We have 3, I'm just using random numbers, but 3 people who get stoned, who get mixed up with 15 people who get burned, and yet, Rabbi Shimon Omer, you don't know b'skila shasreifa chamura. And there, even though the majority are burned, we're still going to go with stoning because stoning is more lenient. And that's what's determining and not the rove. So what he's basically saying is the language that Rabbi Shimon uses doesn't make sense if it was what you say, nisrafim beniskalim, and the majority were niskalim, because then he would just say majority. Well, that sounds okay, what Rabbi Yehuda is saying, but, well, first of all, we're going to have 2 problems. One is it was pretty disrespectful the way he spoke to his father, and that's going to be the topic for tomorrow, okay, or you can listen today after class. Should be up soon, but typical. So now they're going to say ihachi ema seifa. But the second problem is, look at the end of the Mishnah, though. The Mishnah continues and says, Chachamim omrim yidonu b'sreifa shaskila chamura. If you're going to say the whole issue is the nisrafim the cases, the nisrafim were the majority, then when the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Shimon, they shouldn't say we disagree because we think that skila is more severe and therefore they should get burned. No, the rabbis would say, we think you should get burned because the majority are burning. In other words, basically, your whole thing that the majority should be what's determining first, if nothing being otherwise, and why Rabbi Shimon used that language, if they were really the majority, you should have said majority, well, then the rabbis should have used the language of majority, right? Because obviously, each one, right, one says it one way, one says it the other way. One of them, no matter how you read the Mishnah, is going to be in the majority, right? And they should have used the term majority. So when the Chachamim say you don't have b'sreifa shaskila chamura, that doesn't make any sense. Typically, to ruba nisrafim dinu. They should have just said, no, we disagree with you because the majority are burned and we go by majority. So they say, no. Hatam Rabbanit who deka'amar leila Rabbi Shimon. In other words, the rabbis are going to say, in that case, obviously we're going to go by streifa because, I'm sorry, by streifa because the nisrafim are the majority. However, they wanted to specifically add that we disagree with you, though, that you think streifa is more severe. We think stoning is more severe. Okay? So, but they say, Ledida, da'amart streifa chamura. But according to you, who says that shreif is more severe, lo, skila chamura. In other words, it's like when you're having an argument with someone, you might disagree about the conclusion. And that's right, because you think it goes for a totally different reason. But you're not going to not say, but I also disagree with you about your logic. In other words, number one, majority are burned, right? Because the majority of the people there get burned, and that's why we're going to issue burning. But by the way, don't think that I agree with you in what you said, that skila is less severe. No, I think streifa is less severe. So they had to get that last word in and say, and we disagree with you about what you're saying. So therefore, we can, in the end, say that Rabbi Yehuda's nusach must be correct, because again, otherwise Rabbi Shimon, who starts the conversation, should have said, oh, majority are stoned or should get stoned, and that's why we're going to go with stoning. Okay? But instead, they said streifa chamura, and that must be because the case is switched, and the majority aren't stoned. It's even when the majority are burned, we're still going to go with skila because skila is less severe. And then come the rabbis and say, number one, skila are the majority there. We're going to go, I'm sorry, the burning, it's the majority of people burn. We're supposed to get burning. That's what we're going to go with burning. And also, we disagree with you about which is more severe. Okay, and with that, we end today's daf, and you'll start in the next daf with that, with the Shabbat Shiur about Shmuel saying to Rabbi Yehuda, you're a great student, but that's not the way to speak to your father. Okay, so we already reviewed the first part of the daf. So the second part of the daf was just number one. And then we had the whole issue of the warning, and we said it would have to be number one, only according to one opinion. And according to that opinion, it would have to be also a case where you just gave a general warning. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. If you gave a specific warning, you're going to get stoned. You can't just switch it and give the person burning. And then you had a problem with the language, with Rabbi Cheskel's version of the Mishnah. And Rabbi Yehuda said, no, it has to be switched because it doesn't match the language that Rabbi Shimon uses in the Mishnah or his argument. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and Shema B'Sorot Tovot.